So we're rebuilding a Brunswick reproducer. This is an early form of Altona. The last patent date is September of 1917. So we can bet that it's somewhere between 1918 and 1920, but probably no later than 1920. This is their earlier type Brunswick that actually has an aluminum metal diaphragm. It doesn't have mica. It has an aluminum one. This has a place where it would have had a sapphire, but it doesn't have a sapphire anymore. It does have the needle chuck is capable of taking both a steel needle and a fiber needle, a bamboo needle. So to get these screws out, I had soaked the screws in a mixture of camp fuel and a little of this an equal plate camp fuel and a little of this oil and some lacquer thinner on the screws, and coated them with it and waited until it soaked in and it came out. Now some people wonder why you rebuild reproducers. One is the gaskets are not very good at this age, over 100 years old. These are still pliable, but if you notice, when they came out, they still retain their smushed shape, which means that they have lost their elasticity. So this is the old gasket material. You notice it still retains its shape when it comes out. And this is the new gasket material. Notice that it is nice and round and is very noodly. I mean, it's like nice and pliable like a noodle. So we can see the difference. See, that's not very noodly. It's kind of lost all of its plasticity. So any place on these type of reproducers that swivels, these are made out of pot metal, so it is important. I'm using a brass rod with some 1500 grit sandpaper. So what I'm doing is I'm going around these bearings, because even though they swivel now, eventually they will tighten up. So you want to make sure. I first cleaned this with Dawn and very fine steel wool, all of the metal parts of the reproducer. I used Dawn, hot water, and steel wool to get them all shiny. And I will then clean out the bearings. And I also use a little bit of, when I'm finally finished with this, just to make sure that everything is clean, I use camp fuel on everything to give it a final clean. But this has been polished with very fine steel wool to get the nickel shiny, and then polishing with the brass. Another place to make sure that you get clean is in here where the tone arm goes. Eventually it will seize after so many years, so you want to make sure that you take some of the material out, especially now since you found it in a condition where it actually came apart. This is actually pretty amazing because most of these don't come apart very well. So one of the things you want to do is use this brass rod, and this is the bushing that the reproducer turns around in. So you want to clean out this hole here with some very fine sandpaper and a dowel and get it clean as possible, because it is pot metal. All this is pot metal, which is stuff that made out of like zinc and copper and lead and brass all mixed together. So after many years it gets intergranular corrosion and starts to swell. And Brunswicks are notorious for the tone arms crumbling and cracking. This is actually in pretty good shape for a Brunswick. So we're doing some preventative maintenance so that it'll last a lot longer. So we're cleaning this out. As you see, the tone arm is looking much better. I polished this section because this over time will expand, so I have it so it fits nice. This has to change for different kinds of records, for Edison records or Pathé records. This arm goes in and out. This also was pretty damaged, the end here, and that's all polished up. So this works as it should, in and out, not too much effort. See the slot in there? So the main thing is that these tone arms, everything has to move freely on it to not cause any problems. So we pretty much got all of the pot metal stuff all polished. So this is the tone arm all put together. We got all of the parts so that they slide and move freely. One of the main things, you don't want any friction, or as little friction, I should say. So all this has been polished. The shaft's been polished, and the moving parts have been polished. So this is the reproducer, and I've already cut the gaskets for it. This is a brand new gasket. You see it's soft. The old gaskets, to show you one reason, big reason why you change, look at that. See how it moves, but oops, it cracks. Because it lost all of its elasticity over the years. See, and this is the diaphragm. The diaphragm should be centered first. Should not touch the sides at all. So it should be right there, or all around the diaphragm is space so it does not touch the side. Rebuilding a Brunswick is rather awkward because you actually have to put the flange on before you put the diaphragm on. And this makes it a pretty awkward situation to put together. But it's a spring flange so that it can turn. You notice it has the writing in here with the patent and everything, but yet it is not a mica diaphragm. So if you notice, it moves back and forth freely, and when it's in place, it's centered. That is, it isn't to touch the sides of the diaphragm cup. This is very important, otherwise it causes buzz and unwanted noise. And the fulcrum is also not too loose or not too tight. If too loose, it buzzes. If it is too tight, it ceases to be sensitive. Thus, also you have to check that the diaphragm does not touch any of the sides so that it's centered. It's kind of awkward that you have to put the bezel through it as well. So I've checked the needle bar that it centers the diaphragm, doesn't touch the sides. The gasket material, new gasket material, nice pliable new gasket material, is now installed, and it's airtight. The seals are opposite each other. The old material, as I said, is very hard. The new stuff is nice and soft. Should give a better seal and a better sound. This is the first generation of Brunswick diaphragms, which are actually aluminum. Kind of interesting concept, because later on, about maybe 6-7 years ago, aluminum was adopted for the orthophonic diaphragm. Although this is a much thicker diaphragm than that used in the orthophonic. So you have a thick aluminum diaphragm, but it has soft rubber gaskets. we'll see later after we rebuild the motor how this turns out. So we got brand new gaskets in the reproducer. We have the needle bar centered and it is adjusted to get the best sound quality. I also have waxed the screws top and bottom as far as the center diaphragm screw. Also, I put all 4 retainer screws in, and I put a drop of oil before I put them in to hopefully that keeps it in the future from binding too badly so the next person can get it apart. Sometimes these Brunswicks can be quite a problem to get apart because it's pot metal and it swells. We've tried to make as much leeway for a future restorer in the future so that he may be able or she may be able to take it apart. This is known as pot metal, which is not a good choice of materials, and it's lucky it's in this good a shape. So this is the early version of the Brunswick-Altona reproducer. This would be for your Pathé records. Imagine you could put an Edison point in it at this time, probably before they had the special diamond disc. But there's your vertical cut, and this actually turns this way for vertical cut records. And then this is your counterweight. Everything has to swivel evenly, see? It moves rather freely. I gotta lock it in place there. There. So that's how it is set for vertical. So this is the reproducer if you were set for vertical, like a Pathé record. You would play a Pathé record like that. Now the head simply twists this way, and then you twist it